Hello, America, and to our friends around the world, greetings and welcome back to Chapter 4, Part 4 of What Everybody is Saying, an ex-FBI agent's guide to speed reading people by Joe Navarro. We left off at the torso bow. Bowing at the waist is performed almost universally as a sign of subservience, respect, or humility when feeling honored, such as with applause. Notice, for example, how the Japanese, and to a lesser extent in modern times, the Chinese, bow out of respect and deference. We show that we are subservient or of a lower status when we automatically assume a bowed or kowtow position, achieved principally by bending the torso. For Westerners, kowtowing does not come easily, especially when it is a conscious act. However, as we expand our horizons, interact with more and more people from various countries of the Near East and Far East, it behooves us to learn to bow our torsos slightly, particularly when meeting those who are elderly and have earned respect. This simple gesture of reverence will be recognized by those whose culture shows deference by such posture and will confer a social advantage upon those Westerners willing to demonstrate it. Incidentally, Eastern Europeans, especially older, still like to click their heels and bow slightly out of respect. Every time I see this, I think how charming it is that people still show graciousness and deference in today's world, whether done consciously or subconsciously. The torso bow is a nonverbal gesture of regard for others. So that was a short subsection of the chapter. Box 22, insert why you can't stomach certain topics. Did you ever wonder why you get an upset stomach if there is an argument at the dinner table? When you are upset, your digestive system no longer has as much blood as it needs for proper digestion. This ties into the blood going to the muscle groups, the deep muscles, for fighting or running away. Just as your limbic system's freeze, flight, or fight response shunts blood away from the skin, it likewise diverts blood from your digestive system, sending blood to your heart and limb muscles, especially the legs, to prepare for your escape. The upset stomach you feel is a symptom of that limbic arousal. The next time an argument ensues during a meal, you will recognize the limbic response of distress. A child whose parents fight at the dinner table really can't finish his meal. His limbic system a, uh, has trumped alimentation and digestion to prepare them for escape and survival. Along these lines, it is interesting to note how many people vomit after experiencing a traumatic event. In essence, during emergencies, the body is saying that there is no time for digestion. The reaction is to lighten the load and prepare for escape or physical conflict. And that was Grossman, 1996, pages 67 through 73, 67 through 73. Box insert number 23, a supreme kowtow. The universality, excuse me, the universality of torso bows was dramatically illustrated to me in an old newsreel of General Douglas MacArthur while he was assigned to the Philippine government before World War II broke out. It shows a U.S. Army officer exiting MacArthur's office after dropping off some documents. As he leaves, the officer kowtows on his way out, backing out of the room. No one asked him to do it. The behavior was automatically prompted by the officer's brain to let the higher status person know that his position was clear. It was a recognition that MacArthur was in charge. Gorillas, dogs, wolves, and other non human animals also demonstrate the subservient posturing. Remarkably, The officer bowing out of the room was none other than the man who, who one day would become the supreme Allied commander of Europe, architect of the Normandy invasion, and our 34th president, Dwight David Eisenhower. Huh. Incidentally, years later, upon learning that Eisenhower was running for president, MacArthur commented that Eisenhower was the finest clerk he'd ever had. Manchester, 1978, page 166. An addendum to General Eisenhower, he was part of the U.S. Army's uh, trip from Virginia to California to demonstrate, which was documented to be full of perils and was the inspiration for developing the United States, the Continental CONUS highway system, and then the Dwight D. Eisenhower interstate freeway system was what he saw in Germany. Both of those two experiences is what prompted our interconnected nation by way of highways and freeways. Um, and the other part I wanted to throw in here is a bit of trivia. If you've ever watched the musical with Yul Brynner, the the King and I, there is a lot of banter back and forth that no head shall be higher than the King of Siam. And you know, reading that, that's what reminded me of it. So there's a lot of cultures out there that have very unique systems of respect and reverence. All right, now we're moving into torso embellishments. Because nonverbal communication also includes symbols, we have to give some attention to clothing and other accoutrements that are worn on the torso, including the body in general. It is said that clothing makes the man, and I would agree, at least in terms of appearances. I have comments on this. I'll save for further in here. Numerous studies have established that what do we wear, whether a suit or casual clothes, even the colors of our outfits, a blue suit as opposed to a brown suit. Fascinating because as at the end of April 2025 for Pope Francis' funeral, there's been headlines about President Trump's blue suit. Fascinating. Will influence others. Knapp and Hall, 2002, pages 206 through 214. Clothing says a lot about us and can do a lot for us. In a sense, our torsos are billboards upon which we advertise our sentiments. During courtship, we dress up to enchant. While working, we dress for success. And this isn't the segue I wanted to use, but in my flight training, that is something that was discussed. Is when applying for airlines, it was suggested that you learn what that airline's uniform was and buy a suit that was as identical as possible to that airline's crew, uniform, the cockpit, because you go to school for flight training, and after you get your hours and you start flying, you want to be able to look like that you're already ready, that you're all ready to be able to go to work, that the interview is a formality, that you just need the braids, to actually show the appropriate rank designation, the PIC, pilot in command, or the co-pilot, or navigator, or flight engineer, whatever the position happens to be. I'm a big proponent that one should do their best to work self-employed. But if you are in the need of getting capital, to be able to fund the tools of your trade or to fund the training for your future business, look at what it is that the professionals in the industry of which you're applying are wearing and match that, because people on a subconscious level want to see themselves in who it is that they're hiring. All right, so we left off with dressing for success. Similarly, the high school letter jacket, the police badge, and the military decoration are all worn on the torso as a way of calling attention to our achievements. If we want others to notice us, the torso is where it's at. Uh, I learned fast a long time ago not to wear my Letterman's jacket when going to places such as the carnival, where they're notorious for trying to rope you in to spend money. And then once you make that association, that con artists will take advantage of identifying information to be able to create a false rapport, you stop wearing them, or at least I did. If we want others to notice us, the torso is where it's at. When the president gives his State of the Union address before Congress, the red garbed women you notice in a sea of blue and gray are those who, like birds displaying their plumage, are wearing vibrant colors to be noticed. Clothing can be very subdued, very sinister, consider skinhead attire or a gothic look, or very flamboyant, such as that of musicians Liberace or Elton John. Reflecting the mood and or personality of the wearer, we alternatively can use torso adornments or bare parts of our torsos to attract others. Yeah, that's a popular thing with younger women is the midriff. Just be careful of, you know, just remember fishing uses bright shiny objects to attract, the fishing lures uses that to attract the attention of fish and hook them to be feasted upon. So be aware of other such lures in our social environment. Alternatively, we can use torso adornments or bare parts of our torsos to attract to attract others, to show off how muscular or fit we are, or to advertise where we fit in socially, economically, or occupationally. This may explain why so many people fret excessively about what to wear when attending a high profile function or going on a date. Our personal adornments allow us to show our pedigree or our allegiance to a particular group, for example, wearing the colors of our favorite team. I don't know. My behaviors are more simple. I mean, I am in a costume that for the deep dive research I've been doing for the past few years, but bottom line, I just find it easier to dress the way that you're going to be dressed. Uh, I mean, certainly, if you're going to work on an automobile, you're not going to wear, office attire. The button-down white shirt and a tie. I mean, you can, but you're going to have a risk of ruin it, having it ruined, from oil or lubricant or grease or just dirt. So, you know, everything has its season. Clothing can be very descriptive. Oh, and one other note, just to reemphasize, just be aware social engineering people, such as con artists, are very skilled at being able to pick off people based off of, wearing certain things, noticing these vibrant colors or, sports team paraphernalia or even political stuff. There's been issues of that. There was a video of a woman physically attacking a man at a sit down fast food restaurant uh, because he wore a Trump hat. And personally, I think that there should be there should not be a round physical object above her shoulders any longer. But he was very calm and she was very violent. And that's another thing that our society is not ready to handle. And that is the rampant escalation and the lack of punishment, adequate and appropriate punishment for violent women. But that's been covered in other videos extensively and will continue to be done so until it changes. If they are if they are of high or low status, whether they conform to social norms or are part of a sect. Think, for example, Hasidic Jew, Amish farmer, or Hare Krishna. You know, Amish farmers have been definitely getting a high amount of positive publicity for the work they've done in the North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee region over the last 6 to 8 months. In a way, we are what we wear. For years, people told me I dressed like an FBI agent, and they were right. I wore the standard agent uniform: navy blue suit, white shirt, burgundy tie, black shoes, and short hair. I have that problem too when I dress in my normal, my pre-normal clothes until I started learning this stuff. Now I know where to get my resources to be able to look sharp, or, you know, right now, not so much. Mine is more about blending into a different caste system. But anyway, referring to that television show Burn Notice that was on USA about a decade ago, Jeffrey Donovan's character narrates various parts of episodes. And one of them, he details how going to a thrift store and buying a courier's outfit or a shirt and, a khaki pants and a hat, and one can, with a clipboard, get free access to places that they normally wouldn't have access because they look as they belong. And I use the example of somebody with a utility vest and a clipboard. The show he was on, Burn Notice, used the courier example. But the bottom line is people they're blind. They're blind to certain people in society because they just see them as temporary or low status. And you can use that to your advantage to be able to bypass gatekeepers. Obviously, because we have certain employment roles that require specific attire, and since we make conscious choices when it comes to clothing, we need to be careful in our assessment of what it signifies. After all, the guy standing outside your door dressed in a telephone repairman's uniform just might be a criminal who purchased or stole the outfit to gain access to your home. What did I just tell you? Yeah, without going into too much detail about describing who I am, because of my private investigator background, there's certain things that I possess that I have and do utilize to make it easier to bypass certain gatekeeping on a lot of levels. And once those skills are learned, it's annoying to have to stand in line, so to speak, ever again. Even with the caveats just mentioned, clothing needs to be considered in the overall scheme of nonverbal assessment. For that reason, it is important that we wear clothes that are congruent with the messages we want to send others. That ties into what I was just saying about the airlines, about being hired to dress, you know, as if you already work for that airline. The other one is to dress the way those that you're being interviewed by dress, or the one that will be, your direct supervisor dresses, because everybody wants they want somebody who's going to conform. And what better way to look like you conform than dressing not identical but similar? When choosing your wardrobe and accessories, always remain cognizant of the message you are sending with your clothing and the meaning that others may perceive from your dress. Also consider that although you may deliberately want to use your attire to send a signal to one person or group of people at a specific time and place, you may have to pass a lot of other people who are not as receptive to your message along the way. As an example, I've used this, when detailing that I've trained my children to read body language and so forth. One thing I would do is I would have them look at people's shoes. For example, if you see a panhandler with brand new shoes, it's not always a guarantee that they are actually faking it, that they're faking their poverty. But, you know, start with the shoes because it's just like the feet. It's the least controlled area of the body. And if you're going to be standing somewhere for a prolonged amount of time, you're going to want to go for something that's capable of holding yourself upright comfortably. So take that as you will. It's what I passed on to my children so that they can assess people, not just in that regard, but every regard, because you'll You can identify what kind of environment they come from. Are their shoes kept? In the military, did you use a Hershey's bar to polish those boots, son? That was a common refrain, no matter how shiny they were. At seminars, I frequently ask the question, how many of you were dressed by your mother today? Uh, Almost the same type of shaming tactic. Of course, everyone laughs and no one raises his hand. Then I say, well, then you, all of you, chose to dress the way you did. That is when you all look around them and perhaps for the first time realize that they could do a better job of dressing and presenting themselves. Okay, another pop culture reference. Psych. You've got Corbin Burnson, who plays the father, Henry Spencer, who's a cop, right? He's teaching his son to become a cop and to pay attention to details. And they're sitting in the courtroom, and Corbin Burnson is telling his son, what do you think of the jurors? And one of the things that comes up is that man that's in the juror box is single because only a single man would leave the house that way because a wife would not let her husband exit the home wearing that shirt while in a jury box. Whether that's true or not, it's something that you start looking at. You look at who dresses well, people in relationships or people seeking relationships, people that have just gotten divorced, people that are older, people that are younger. You start putting these things together, such as a puzzle, and you start recognizing there is a pattern to a lot of this stuff. And that is what's key to identifying a lot of the nonverbal communication out there is recognizing the various patterns, just as we did with the behavioral table of elements, taking those deception rating scale numbers to tally up the likelihood of deception. So, too, you can apply that to somebody's daily uniform, their daily presentation. Do they use hair product? Do they shave? Do they use a cheap blade versus a quality blade? And so on. Are their clothes ironed or do they just throw them in a pile? The more you do this, the more you're going to become intuitive with ascertaining this stuff, and it's just going to jump out at you. You're going to be able to identify that people were wearing, out of 18 people, 6 were wearing ball caps, 3 of them were red. One man was completely bald, 3 had receding hairlines, so on and so forth. And it just becomes intuitive where it's just there. The recall is there. That is what that is when they all look around them and perhaps for the first time realize that they could do a better job of dressing and presenting themselves. After all, before two people first meet, the only input each has to go on about the other is physical appearance and other nonverbal communication or nonverbal communications. Perhaps it's time to consider how you are being perceived. All right, one moment. This is the perfect place to insert what it is that I wanted to touch on. Everybody's heard of Costco. Costco carries a brand of jeans called Kirkland. I think it's a reference to Kirkland, Washington, and they're just a denim jean. There's nothing fancy about them. And in fact, around the 90s, or no, the early 2000s, when President Obama went to throw the first pitch of the baseball season, everybody mocked him for wearing that type of jeans. The dad jeans, I think they called them, and then women have the mom jeans, and it's one of those things where it's ha ha ha. They're so off the shelf. It's a disparaging remark, but quite often people that don't have financial options don't care. They just want clothes, that work. Um, and especially the more older you get, the more you don't care about fashion trends. Um, yeah, I don't want to get too deep in it on it. We can all think of the older person that wears the, you know, the high waters, the high waisted pants or something. Bottom line is there's denim jeans and there's not. My weights fluctuated over my life, and when I lived in a metro area, I ran with a group of people that was very active in flirting and interacting with women at bars and whatnot. So, having had those Kirkland jeans, I realized that those weren't going to do me any good. And after I had dropped some weight, I went down to Nordstrom and bought an excessively expensive pair of jeans from a company or Sevens for All Mankind. And night and day attitudes changed, and women just entertaining me to, yep, you came home with me because I wanted those on the floor uh, type of comments. So, yeah, depending on what it is your goal is, what Mr. Navarro is discussing is very, 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 very critical, and it's easy to overlook it. And that is, if you have an interest in romantic aspects, to up your romantic aspects, you have to become more serious about your clothing presentation. And it sounds extraordinarily shallow because it is. Nobody's interested in, quite honestly, nobody's interested in Hunter Biden's paintings because it's money laundering. But you are going to brag if you have a Picasso. And that's the way you have to look at your clothing. That's the reason that a lot of people spend the money on the designer handbags, clothing labels. That's the reason that there's a fashion week, you know, to kick off the new seasons. So, and people are, you've got uh, occasional Cortex in New York who wore a $50,000 gown to an event. It's because people judge you not just by the words you use, as the commercial states, but by the clothes you wear. And if you're just wearing clothes to be functional, then you're only going to be observed as functional. That can work to your advantage if you're attempting to do certain things under the radar. But if you're attempting to attract somebody for a relationship, you need to start thinking fishing lures, and you need to be willing to to invest in whatever the mid 2020s version of the Sevens for All Mankind is for men and whatever it is for women, and go from there. And where, if you have, I have hair. Some people don't have hair, uh, but if you have hair, you want real product, not off the shelf product. And real product, what I mean is American Crew forming cream or one of the other products that American Crew uses or something of that caliber or better. All right, we're going to leave it off here. We're getting a little long. We're going to, oh, wait, I still need to read your inserts. One moment. It's appropriate to be discussing this because the next topic is going to be on preening. So talking about American Crew for using it for your hair and the Sevens for All Mankind is I perhaps it ties in because that's all preening and it's often mocked, but it it works because people are shallow. All right, box insert number 24. You are what you wear. Imagine this scenario. You are walking down a sparsely populated street one evening and you hear someone coming up behind you. You can't see the person's face or hands clearly in the dark, but you can determine he is wearing a suit and tie and carrying a briefcase. Now, imagine the same dark sidewalk, but this time picture that all you can see behind you is the outline of a person wearing disheveled and baggy clothing, sagging pants, a tilted cap, a stained t shirt, and tennis shoes that are worn and raggedy. In either case, You can't see the person well enough to discern any other details, and you are assuming it is a man based simply on the clothing. But based on the attire alone, you will likely draw different conclusions about the potential threat each person possesses or poses to your safety. Even if the approaching place or even if the approaching pace of each man is the same as the person nears, your limbic brain will activate. Even though your reaction to these individuals will be based exclusively on your reaction to their clothing, your assessment of the situation will either make you feel comfortable or uncomfortable, even potentially frightened. I am not going to tell you which person would make you feel more comfortable. That is for you to decide. But right or wrong, all other things being equal, it is their clothing that often greatly influences what we think of individuals. Although clothing itself cannot hurt us physically, it can affect us socially. Consider how judgmental and suspicious some Americans have become since September 11, 2001, when they see a person in clothing that reflects a Middle Eastern background. The story or the examples that I gave about not wanting, me not wearing a mask in grocery stores and people parting as if I was Moses at the Red Sea is another example. That's another big thing is the the how susceptible people were to that social engineering to wear a face diaper for all those months or even years, depending on your region. And furthermore, imagine how some Middle Eastern Americans have been made to feel as a result. I tell college students that life is not always fair and that unfortunately they will be judged by their attire. Therefore, they need to think carefully about their clothing choices and the messages they are sending to others. All right, insert box number 25. We aren't always who we appear to be. Clearly, we have to be careful when we assess a person on the basis of clothing only, as it can sometimes lead to the wrong conclusion. I was in London last year at a very nice hotel just 4 blocks from Buckingham Palace where all of the staff, including the maids, wore Armani suits. If I had seen them on the train going to work, I could easily have misled I could easily have been misled as to their relative social status. So remember, because it is culturally prescribed and easily manipulated, clothing is only part of the nonverbal picture. We assess clothing to determine whether it is sending a message not to judge people based on their attire. I'm going to see if I can find a clip to demonstrate this.
When a Code 5 authorization for undercover surveillance is approved, officers proceed to the Central Facilities Building where the department has an impressive body of research on the precise behavior and dress of today's average street gang member.
You know, Friday, I think we finally found your look.